Well, Corporal Westerberg, just why do you think you're a plant? And as he spoke, Harris glanced down again at the card on his desk. It was the base commander himself, made out of Cox's heavy scrawl. Doc, this is the lad I told you about. Talk to him and try to figure out what's going on. What's this delusion coming from? He's from the new garrison, the new check station on asteroid Y3. We don't want anything to go wrong here, especially a silly thing like this. Harris pushed the card aside and stared back at the youth across the desk from him. The young man seemed ill at ease and appeared to be avoiding answering the question Harris had put to him. Harris frowned. Westerberg was a good-looking chap, actually handsome in his patrol uniform, and a shock of blonde hair over one eye. He was tall, almost 6 feet, fine, healthy lad, just 2 years out of training. And according to the card, he was born in Detroit, had measles when he was 9, interested in jet engines, tennis, and girls, and he's 26 years old. Well, Corporal Westerberg, why do you think you're a plant? The corporal looked up shyly. Sir, I am a plant. I don't just think so. And I've been a plant for several days now. I see. You mean that you weren't always a plant, though? No, sir. I just became a plant recently. And what were you before you became a plant? Well, sir, I was just like the rest of you. And there was silence. And Dr. Harris took up his pen and scratched a few lines, but nothing of importance came. A plant. Such a healthy-looking lad. Harris removed his steel-rimmed glasses and polished them. He put them on again and leaned back in his chair. Care for a cigarette, Corporal? No, sir. The doctor lit one himself, resting his arm on the edge of the chair. Corporal, you must realize that there are very few men who become plants, especially on such short notice. I have to admit that you're the first person who's ever told me such a thing. Yes, sir, I realize it has to be quite rare. You can understand why I'm interested then. When you say you're a plant, you mean you're not capable of moving? Do you mean you're a vegetable as opposed to an animal, or what? I can't tell you anymore. I'm sorry, sir. Well, would you mind telling me how you became a plant? Corporal Westerberg hesitated. He stared down at the floor, then out the window at the spaceport, then at a fly on his desk. At last he stood up, getting slowly to his feet. I can't even tell you that, sir. You can't? Why not? Because I promised not to. The room was silent again. Corporal, just who did you promise? I can't even tell you that, sir. I'm sorry. All right, Corporal. You may go now. Thanks for your time. I'm sorry I'm not more helpful. And the corporal went slowly out, and Harris closed the door after him. Then he went across his office to the vid phone, and he rang Commander Cox's letter. A moment later, the beefy, good-natured face of the base commander appeared. Cox, this is Harris. I talked to him. All I could get is the statement that he's a plant. What else is there? What kind of behavior pattern is this? Well, the first thing they noticed was that he wouldn't do any work. The garrison chief reported that Westerberg would wander off outside the garrison and just sit all day long. Just sit there. In the sun? Yeah, just sit in the sun. Then at nightfall, he would come back in. When they asked why he wasn't working in the jet repair building, he told them he had to be out in the sun. Then he said... Yes, said what? He said that work was unnatural, that it was a waste of time. The only worthwhile thing was to sit, contemplate, be outside. What then? Then they asked him how he got that idea. And then he revealed to them that he had become a plant. I'm going to have to talk with him again, I can see. And he's applied for a permanent discharge from the patrol. What reason did he give for that? It's the same. He's a plant now. There's no more interest in being a patrolman. All he wants to do is sit in the sun. It's the strangest thing you've ever heard. Alright. Think I'll visit him in his quarters. I'll go after dinner. Good luck. But who even heard of a man turning into a plant? Who told him it wasn't possible? He just smiled at us. Well, I'll let you know how I make out. Harris walked slowly down the hall. It was after 6, the evening meal was over. A dim concept was coming into his mind, but it was much too soon to be sure. And he increased his pace, turning right at the end of the hall. 2 nurses passed, hurrying by. Westerberg was quartered with a buddy, a man who had been injured in a jet blast and was now almost recovered. Harris came to the dorm room and stopped, checking the numbers on the doors. "Can I help you, sir?" a robot attendant said, gliding up. "I'm looking for Corporal Westerberg's room." "3 doors to the right." And he went on. Asteroid Y3 had only recently been garrisoned and staffed. It had become the primary checkpoint to halt and examine ships entering the system from outer space. And the garrison made sure that no dangerous bacteria, fungus, or whatnot arrived to infect the system. A nice asteroid it was, warm, well-watered, with trees, lakes, and lots of sunlight. The most modern garrison of the 9 planets. And he shook his head, coming to the 3rd floor. He stopped, raising his hand and knocking. "Who's there?" "I want to see Corporal Westerberg." Then, a bovine youth with horned-rimmed glasses looked out and a book in his hand. "Who are you?" "Dr. Harris." "I'm sorry, but Corporal Westerberg is asleep." "Would he mind if I woke him up? I want very much to talk to him." Harris peered inside. He could see the neat room with a desk, a rug, a lamp, 2 bunks. On one of the bunks was Westerberg, lying face up, his arms folded across his chest, his eyes tightly closed. "Sir, I'm afraid I can't wake him up for you, much as you'd like to." "You can't? Why not?" "Sir, Corporal Westerberg won't wake up. Not after the sun sets. He just won't. He can't be wakened." "Really?" "But in the morning, as soon as the sun comes out, he leaps out of bed and goes outside. He stays there the whole day." "I see. Well, thanks, anyhow. There's more to this than I realized." And he went back the way he'd come. It was a warm, sunny day. The sky was almost free of clouds, and a gentle wind moved through the cedars along the bank of the stream. There was a path leading from the hospital building down the slopes of the stream. And at the stream, a small bridge led over the other side, and a few patients were standing on the bridge, wrapped in their bathrobes, looking aimlessly down at the water. It took Harris several minutes to find Westerberg. The youth was not with his other patients, near or around the bridge. He had gone farther down, past the cedar trees and onto the strip of bright meadow, where poppies and grass grew everywhere. He was sitting on the stream bank on a flat gray stone, leaning back and staring up, his mouth open a little. He did not notice the doctor until Harris was almost beside him. "Hello." Westerberg opened his eyes, looking up. He smiled and got slowly to his feet, a graceful flowing motion that was rather surprising for a man of his size. "Hello, doctor. What brings you out here?" "Nothing, really. I just thought I'd get some sun." "Here, you can share my rock." And Westerberg moved over, and Harris sat down gingerly, being careful not to catch the trousers on the sharp edges of the rock. And he lit a cigarette and gazed silently down at the water. Beside him, Westerberg had resumed his strange position, leaning back, resting on his hands, staring up at his eyes touched shut. "It's a nice day." "Yeah." "You come here every nice day?" "Yeah." "You like it better out here than in there?" "I just can't stay inside." "You can't? How do you mean you can't?" Without air, you'd die, wouldn't you? And you'd die without sunlight? Westerberg nodded. Corporal, may I ask you something? Do you plan to do this the rest of your life? Sit out in the sun on a flat rock. Nothing else. Westerberg nodded. How about your job? You went to school for years to become a patrolman. You wanted to enter the patrol very badly. You were given a fine rating, first-class position. How do you feel? Giving all that up, you know? It won't be easy to get back in again. You realize that. I realize. And you're really just going to give it all up. That's right. Harris was silent for a while. At last, he put a cigarette out and turned toward the youth. All right. Let's say you give up your job and sit in the sun. What happens then? Someone else has to do the job instead of you. That's true. The job has to be done. Your job has to be done. And if you don't do it, someone else has to do it. I suppose so. Westerberg, suppose everyone felt the way you do. Suppose everyone wanted to sit in the sun all day. What would happen? No one would check ships coming from outer space. Bacteria and toxic crystals would enter the system and cause mass death and suffering. Isn't that right? If everyone felt the way I do, they wouldn't be going into outer space. But they have to. They have to trade. They have to get minerals and products and new plants. Why? To keep society going. Why? Well, people couldn't live without a society. Westerberg said nothing to that. Harris watched him, but the youth did not answer. Isn't that right? Perhaps. It's a peculiar business, Doctor. You know I struggled for years to get through training. I had to work and pay my own way, washed dishes, worked in kitchens, studied at night, learned and crammed and worked on and on. And you know what I think now? What? I'd wish I'd become a plant earlier. Westerberg, when you come inside, stop at my office. I want to give you a few tests, if you don't mind. The shock box? I knew that would be coming around, sure. I don't mind. About 3, Corporal? And the Corporal nodded. Harris made his way up the hill to the path, toward the hospital building. The whole thing was beginning to become more clear to him. A boy who had struggled all of his life. Financial insecurity, idealized goal, getting a patrol assignment. He finally reached it. Found the load too great. And on asteroid Y3, there was too much vegetation to look at all day. Primitive identification and projection of the flora of the asteroid. Concept of security involved in immobility and permanence, unchanging forests. And he entered the building. A robot orderly stopped him almost at once. Sir, Commander Cox wants you urgently on the vid phone. Thanks. Harris strode into his office. He dialed Cox's letter, and the commander's face came presently into focus. Cox, this is Harris. I've been out talking to the boy. I'm beginning to get this lined up now. I can see the pattern. Too much load for too long. Finally gets what he wants, and the idealization shatters under... Harris! Cox suddenly barked. Shut up and listen. I just got a report from Y3. They're sending an express rocket here. It's on the way. An express rocket? 5 more cases. Just like Westerberg. They all say they're plants. The garrison chief is worried. So he has to find out what it is, or the garrison will fall apart. You get me, Harris? Find out what it is. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. By the end of the week, there were 20 cases, and all, of course, are from asteroid Y3. Commander Cox and Harris stood together at the top of the hill, looking gloomily down at the stream below. 16 men, 4 women, sat in the sun along the bank, none of them moving, none speaking. An hour had gone by since Cox and Harris, and all that time the 20 people below had not stirred. "I don't get it," Cox said. "I just absolutely don't get it, Harris. Is this the beginning of the end? Is everything going to start cracking around us? It gives me a strange feeling to see those people down there, basking in the sun, just sitting and basking. Who's that man there with the red hair?" "That's Ulrich Deutsch. He was second in command of the garrison. Now look at him. Sits and dozes with his mouth open and his eyes shut. A week ago, that man was climbing, going right up to the top. When the garrison chief retires, he was supposed to take over. Maybe another year at the most. And all his life, he's been climbing to get up there. And now he just sits in the sun. That person, the brunette with the short hair, career woman, head of the entire office staff of the garrison, the man beside her, janitor, and that gal, secretary, just out of the school. All kinds. And I got a note in the morning, 3 more coming in sometime today. The strange thing is, they really want us to sit down there. They're completely rational. They could do something else, but they just don't care to. Well, what are you going to do? Have you found anything? We're counting on you. Let's hear it." I couldn't get anything out of them directly, but I've had some interesting results in the shop box. Let's go inside and I'll show you. Fine. Show me anything you've got. This is serious. Now I know how Tiberius felt when the Christians showed up in high places. Harris snapped off the light, and the room was pitch black. "I'll run this first reel for you. The subject is one of the best biologists stationed at the garrison, Robert Bradshaw. He came in yesterday. I got a good run from the shock box because of Bradshaw's mind is so highly differentiated. There's a lot of repressed material, non-rational nature, more than usual." And he pressed a switch, and the projector whirred, and on the far wall, a 3-dimensional image appeared in color. So real that it might have been the man himself. And Robert Bradshaw was a man of 50, heavy-set, with iron gray hair and a square jaw. He sat in the chair calmly, his hands resting on the arms, oblivious to the electrodes attached to his neck and wrist. "See, there I go. Watch," Harris said. The film image appeared approaching Bradshaw. "Now, Mr. Bradshaw, this won't hurt at all. It'll help us a lot," he said from inside the screen, and the image rotated the controls on the shock box. Bradshaw stiffened, and his jaw set, but otherwise he gave no sign. The image of Harris regarded him for a time and then stepped away from the controls. "Can you hear me, Mr. Bradshaw?" "Yes." "What is your name?" "Robert C. Bradshaw." "What is your position?" "Chief Biologist, Y3. "And are you there now?" "No, I'm in a hospital." "Why?" "Because I admitted to the garrison chief that I had become a plant." "And is that true? Are you a plant?" "Yes. In a non-biological sense. I retain the physiology of a human being, of course." "What do you mean, then, that you're a plant?" "The references to attitudinal responses." "Go on." "It's possible for a warm-blooded animal, an upper primate, to adopt the psychology of a plant, to some extent." "Yes." "This is what I refer to. I refer to this." "And the others, they refer to this also?" "Yes." "How did this occur? Your adopting of this attitude?" "See? Strong conflict. He wouldn't have gone on if he had been fully conscious. In short, I was taught to become a plant. The image of Harris showed surprise and interest. What do you mean you were taught to become a plant? They realized my problems and taught me to become a plant. And now I'm free from them. All the problems. Who? Who taught you? The Pipers. Who? The Pipers? Who are the Pipers? Mr. Bradshaw, who are the Pipers? And after a long, agonized pause, the heavy lips parted. They, live in the woods. Harris snapped off the projector. The lights came up. He and Cox blinked. That was all I could get. But I was lucky to get just that. He wasn't supposed to tell me, understand? Not at all. That was the thing they all promised not to do. Tell who taught them to become plants. The Pipers who live in the woods on asteroid Y3. And you got this story from all 20? No. Most of them put up too much of a fight. I couldn't even get this much from them. Pipers, well. What do you propose to do? Just wait around until you can get the full story? Is that your program? No. Not at all. I'm going to Y3. And I'm going to find out who the Pipers are myself. The patrol ship made its landing with care and precision, its jets choking in the final silence. The hatch slid back and Dr. Henry Harris found himself staring out at a field, a brown, sun-baked landing field. At the end of the field was a tall signal tower. Around the field on all sides was a long gray building, the garrison check station itself. Not far off, a huge Venusian cruiser was parked. A vast green hulk like an enormous lime. The technicians from the station were swarming all over it, checking and examining each inch for lethal life forms, poisons that might have attached themselves to the hull. They're all out, sir. Harris nodded. He took hold of the two suitcases and stepped carefully down. The ground was hot underfoot. He blinked in the bright sunlight. Jupiter was in the sky, and the vast planet reflected considerable sunlight down onto the asteroid. Harris started across the field, carrying his suitcase. The field attendant had already been busy opening the storage compartment of the patrol ship, extracting his trunk, and the attendant lowered the trunk into a waddling dolly and came after him, manipulating the little truck with bored skill. And as Harris came to the entrance of the signal tower to the gate, it slid back and a man came forward. An older man, large and robust, with white hair and a steady walk. How are you, Doctor? I'm Lawrence Watts, the garrison chief. And they shook hands, and Watts smiled down at Harris. He was a huge old man, still regal and straight in his dark blue uniform, with his gold epaulets sparkling on his shoulder. Did you have a good trip? Come on, inside. I have a drink fixed for you. It gets hot around here, with the big mirror up there. Jupiter. Harris followed him inside the building. The signal tower was cool and dark, a welcome relief. Why is the gravity so near Terra's? I expected to go flying off like a kangaroo. Is it artificial? No. There's a dense core of some kind of this asteroid. Some kind of metallic deposit. That's why we picked the asteroid out of all the others. It made the construction problems much simpler. It also explains why the asteroid has natural air and water. Did you see the hills on your way in? The hills? When we get up higher in the tower, we'll be able to see over the buildings. It's quite a natural park here. Regular little forest, complete with everything you'd want. Come in here, Harris. This is my office. The old man strode at a quiet clip around the corner and into a large, well-furnished apartment. Oh, isn't this pleasant? I intend to make my last year here as amiable as possible. Of course, with the Dutch gone, I may be here forever. Oh well, sit down, Harris. Thanks. Harris took a chair, stretching his legs out. He watched Watts and he closed the door to the hall. By the way, any more cases come up? 2 more today. Almost 30 in all. We have 300 men in this station. At the rate it's going... Chief, you spoke about a forest. Somewhere on the asteroid. Do you allow the crew to go into the forest at will? Or do you restrict them to the building and the grounds? Well, it is a difficult situation, Harris. I have to let the men leave the grounds sometimes. They can see the forest from the buildings. And as long as you can see a nice place to stretch out or relax, that does it. Once every 10 days, they have a full period of rest. Then they go out and they fool around. And then it happens. Yes, I suppose so. As long as they can see the forest, they'll want to go. I can't help it. I know. I'm not censoring you. Well, what's your theory? What happens to them out there? What do they do? What happens? Once they get out there and take it easy for a while, they don't want to come back and start working. It's boondoggling. Playing hooky. They don't want to work. So off they go. How about this business of their delusions? Listen, Harris. You know as well as I do that that's a lot of poppycock. There's no more plants here than you or I are plants. They just don't want to work, that's all. When I was a cadet, we had a few ways to make people work. I wish we could lay a few on their backs, like we used to. You think this is just simple goal breaking then? Don't you think it is? No. They really believe they're plants. I put them through the high-frequency shock treatment, the shock box. The whole nervous system is paralyzed. All inhibitions stopped cold. They tell the truth. Then they say the same thing, and more. Harris, you're a doctor. And I suppose you know what you're talking about. But look at the situation here. We have a garrison. A good, modern garrison. We're probably the most modern outfit in the system. Every new device and gadget is here that science can produce. Harris, this garrison is one vast machine. And the men are the parts. And each has his job. The maintenance crew, the biologist, the office crew, the managerial staff. Look what happens when one person steps away from his job. Everything else begins to creak. We can't service the bugs if no one services the machines. We can't order food to feed the crew if no one makes out reports and takes inventory. We can't direct any kind of activity and the second in command decides to go out and sit in the sun all day. 30 people. 1/10 of the garrison. We can't run without them. The garrison is built that way. You take the support out, the whole building falls. No one can leave. We're all tied here. And these people know it. And they know they have no right to do that. Run off on their own. No one has the right anymore. We're all too tightly interwoven to suddenly start doing what we want. It's unfair to the rest. to the majority. Listen, Chief, can I ask you something? What is it? Are there any inhabitants of this asteroid? Are there any natives? Natives. Yeah, yes. There was some kind of aboriginal types living out there. And he waved vaguely toward the window. What were they like? You've seen them? Yes, I've seen them. At least I saw them when we first came here. They hung around for a while, watching us. And after a time, they disappeared. Did they die of some kind of disease? No, they just disappeared into the forest. They might still be there someplace. What kind of people are they? Well, the story is they're originally from Mars. They don't look much like Martians, though. They're dark, a kind of coppery color. Thin, very agile in their own way. They hunt and they fish. No written language. We didn't pay much attention to them. I see. Have you ever heard of anything called the Pipers? The Pipers? No. No, why? The patients mentioned something called the Pipers. According to Bradshaw, the Pipers taught him to become a plant, and he learned it from them, a kind of teaching. Pipers? What are they? I don't know. Thought maybe you might know. My first assumption, of course, was that they're the natives. Now I'm not so sure, not after hearing your description of them. The natives were primitive savages. They don't have anything to teach anybody, especially a top-flight biologist. Chief, I'd like to go into the woods and look around. Is that possible? Certainly. I can arrange it for you. I'll give you one of the men to show you all around. I'd rather go alone. Is there any danger out there? No. Not that I know of. Except the Pipers, of course. Well, there's only one way to find them, and that's it. I'll have to take my chance. If you walk in a straight line, you'll find yourself back at the garrison in about 6 hours. It's a small little asteroid we inhabit. There's a couple of streams and lakes. Don't fall in. About snakes, poisonous insects. Nothing like that reported. We did a lot of tramping around at first, but it's grown back now the way it was. We never encountered anything dangerous. Thanks, Chief. I'll see you before nightfall. Good luck! And the chief and his 2 armed escorts turned and went back across the rise, down to the other side of the garrison. Harrison watched. Then he turned and started into the grove of trees. The woods were very silent around him as he walked. Trees towered up on all sides of him, huge, dark green trees like eucalyptus. The ground underfoot was soft and endless, leaves that had fallen and rotted in the soil. And after a while, the grove of high trees fell behind, and he found himself crossing a dry meadow. Grass and weeds burned brown in the sun. Insects buzzed around him, rising up from the dry weed stalks. Something scuttled ahead, hurrying through the undergrowth. He caught sight of a gray ball with many legs, scampering furiously. Its antennas were weaving. The meadow ended at the bottom of a hill. He was going up now, going higher and higher. And ahead of him, an endless expanse of green rose, acres of wild growth. And he scrambled to the top, finally, blowing and panting, catching his breath. And he went on. He was going down again, plunging into a deep gully. Tall ferns grew. He was entering a living Jurassic forest, ferns that stretched out endlessly ahead of him. Down he went, walking carefully. And the air began to turn cold around him. And the floor of the gully was damp and silent. Underfoot, the ground was almost wet. He came out on a level table. It was dark, with the ferns growing up on all sides. Dense growths of ferns, silent and unmoving. He he came upon a natural path, an old stream bed, rough and rocky, but easy to follow. The air was thick and oppressive. Beyond the ferns, he could see the side of the next hill, a green field rising up. Something gray was ahead. Rocks piled up like boulders, scattered and stacked here and there. The stream was a bed laid directly ahead of him. Apparently, this had been a pool of some kind, a stream emptying from it. He climbed the first of the boulders, awkwardly, feeling his way up, and at the top he paused and rested again. And yet, he had no luck. So far, he had not met any of the natives. It would be thought, thrown at him, that he would never find these mysterious pipers that were stealing the men away, if such thing really existed. If he could find the natives, talk to them, perhaps he could find out something. And as yet, he had been unsuccessful. He looked around. The woods were very silent. The asteroid was small. He should be able to find them by nightfall. He started down the rocks. More rocks rose up ahead, and he climbed them. Suddenly, he stopped, listening. Far off, he could hear a sound, the sound of water. Was he approaching a pool of some kind? He went on again, trying to locate the sound. And he scrambled down the rocks and up rocks, and all around him there was silence, except for the splashing of distant water. Maybe a waterfall, maybe water in motion, a stream. If he found the stream, he might find the natives. The rocks ended and the stream bed began again, but this time it was wet, and the bottom muddy and overgrown with moss. He was on the right track. Not too long ago, this stream had flowed, probably during the rainy days, and he went up on the side of the stream, pushing through the ferns and vines, and a golden snake slid expertly out of his path. Something glinted. Ahead, something sparkling through the ferns. Water. A pool. And he hurried, pushing the vines aside and stepping out, leaving them behind. He was standing on the edge of the pool, a deep pool sunk in the hollow of the gray rocks, surrounded by ferns and vines. The water was clear and bright and in motion, flowing in a waterfall at the far end. It was beautiful, and he stood watching, marveling at it, the undisturbed quality of it. And untouched it was, just as it had always been, probably, as long as the asteroid had existed. Was he the first to ever see this? Perhaps it was so hidden, so concealed by the ferns. It gave him a strange feeling almost of ownership, and he stepped down a little toward the water. Then he noticed her. The girl was sitting on the far edge of the pool, staring down into the water, resting her head on one drawn-up knee. She had been bathing, and he could see that at once. Her body was still and wet, coppery and glistening. She had not seen him, and he stopped holding his breath. All at once, the girl looked up. Hair shifted, suddenly conscious of himself as an intruder, and he stepped back. I'm sorry. I'm from the garrison. I didn't mean to come poking around. She nodded without speaking. You don't mind? No. She spoke Terran. And he moved a little toward her, around the other side of the pool. I hope you don't mind me bothering you. I won't be on the asteroid for very long. This is my first day here. I just arrived. From Terra. She smiled faintly. I'm a doctor. Henry Harris. And he looked down at her. The slim, coppery body gleaming in the sunlight, a faint sheen of moisture on her arms. You might be interested in why I'm here. Maybe you can even help me. Oh? Would you like to help me? Yes, of course. That's good. Mind if I sit down? He looked around and found himself a flat rock. He sat down slowly and faced her. You see, we have a problem at the garrison. Something's been happening to some of the men. It seems to be spreading. We have to find out what causes it, or we won't be able to run the garrison. He waited for a moment. She nodded slightly. How silent she was. Silent and unmoving, just like the ferns. Well, I've been able to find out a few things from them. One very interesting thing stands out. They keep saying that something called the Pipers are responsible for their condition. They say the Pipers taught them. Do you know the Pipers? She nodded. You do? I was sure they would. If the Pipers really existed, and they do exist, don't they? They exist. And they're here. In the woods. Yes. I see. You don't suppose there's any chance you could take me to them, do you? Take you? Yeah. I have this problem, and I have to solve it. You see, the base commander on Terra was assigned this to me. This business about the Pipers. It has to be solved, and I'm the one assigned to do the job. So it's important for me to find them. Do you understand? She nodded. Well, will you take me to them? The girl was silent. For a long time she sat, staring down into the water, resting her head against her knees. Harris began to become impatient. He fidgeted back and forth. Well, will you? It's important for the whole garrison. What do you say? Maybe I could give you something. What do I have? I could give you a lighter. The girl stood up, rising slowly, without motion or effort. Harris's mouth fell open. He blinked. Without effort, she had stood, seemingly without change. And all at once she was standing instead of sitting, standing and looking calmly at her, her small face expressionless. Will you? Yes. Come along. Harris followed quickly, stumbling across the rocks. Fine. Thanks a lot. I'm very interested to meet these Pipers. Where are you taking me, to your village? How much time do we have before nightfall? The girl did not answer. She had entered the ferns already. How silently she glided. Wait for me! He entered the ferns. Well, I'll be damned. I'm sure it didn't take you long, Commander Cox said. He leaped down the steps, 2 at a time. Let me give you a hand. Harris grinned. It isn't worth it. I'm going to give up. Come on inside, soldier. Give me a hand. And a patrolman hurried over and took one of the suitcases. The 3 men went inside, down the corridor to Harris's quarters. Harris unlocked the door, and the patrolman deposited his suitcase inside. Thanks. It's good to be back, even for a little while. I just came back to settle my affairs. I have to return to Y3 tomorrow. And you didn't solve the problem? I solved it, but I haven't cured it. I'm going back. Get to work right away. There's a lot to be done. You figured out what it is? Yes, it's just what the men said. It's the Pipers. So the Pipers do exist. Yeah, they do exist. And he removed his coat and put it over the back of the chair. The Pipers exist, all right. In the minds of the garrison crew. To the crew, the Pipers are real. The crew created them. It's a massive gnosis, a group projection, and all the men there have it. To some degree. How did it start? Those men on Y3 were sent there because they were skilled, highly trained men. And all their lives they've been schooled by more complex modern society's fast tempo, high integration between people, constant pressure towards some goals. Those men are put down suddenly on an asteroid, where there are natives living the most primitive existence, completely vegetable lives, no concept of goal, no concept of purpose, and hence no ability to plan. And the natives live that way, from day to day, sleeping, picking food from the trees, a kind of Garden of Eden existence, without a struggle, without a conflict. Each of the garrison crew sees these natives, unconsciously thinks his own early life when he was a child, when he had no worries, no responsibilities, before he joined modern society, a baby lying in the sun. But he can't admit it to himself. He can't admit that he might want to live like the natives, to lie and sleep all day. So he invents the Pipers, an idea of a mysterious group living in the woods to trap him, lead him into their kind of life. Then he can blame them, not himself. What are you going to do? Have the woods burned? No, that's not the answer. The woods are harmless. The answer is psychotherapy for the men. And that's why I'm going back. I see. Well, it makes sense. I hope it does. After all, it's just a question of increasing their self-awareness. When they have the Pipers, they'll vanish. Harris opened the door and the commander went out into the hall. Harris closed the door after him and then went back across the room. And he looked out the window for a moment, his hands in his pocket. He put his shoes in the corner of the room. Then he bent over and, snapping one of the suitcases, he opened the suitcase. From it he took a bulging gunny sack. Carefully he emptied the contents of the sack out on the floor. Dirt. Rich, soft dirt. Dirt had collected during his last hours there. Dirt he had carefully gathered up. And when the dirt was spread out on the floor, he sat in the middle of it. He stretched himself out, leaning back. Tomorrow. How warm the dirt was. And he was sound asleep in a moment.